Welcome back to the Epicurean Smokes coverage of the Premium Cigar Association Trade Show 2025.
They work with our team, the PCA, in government affairs on federal and state issues. To my left, we have Patrick Anderson, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Cigar Association of America. And then on my far left, which is hilarious that Dennis is on my far left over here, we have Dennis Potter, who is a consultant for Cigar Rights of America. So really the brain trust of the three main trade associations that are involved advocating for your rights. We're here, and we're going to talk a little bit about taxes, tariff, and trade. So I want to start here, state of play. I know, Rob, you and I have been working a lot on this Monday. I was at the White House discussing trade and the tariff situation with some of the administration officials. What is the state of play? If you could start there, and then Patrick and Dennis, if you could follow up from that.
No, thanks, Josh. And you're right. All three organizations are in almost daily contact with the Trump administration to talk about the current tariff situation going on. The most important thing as an industry, I think, that we need to remember is the Trump administration was an ally to the cigar industry in his first administration. He prioritized making sure that our industry was protected from overbearing regulations at the FDA, and he ultimately is very happy with the current ruling that we won in our court case with deeming that helped move that FDA process off of our plate. But more importantly, the Trump administration does not look at tariffs as punishment on the cigar industry. They're leverage tools with bad actors. This is not a target for any trade ally, which a lot of our cigar producing countries are. This is leverage for bad acting countries such as China to bring them to the table, make sure that they're negotiating properly with us. We're reducing trade deficit. This is not a target at an artisan industry such as our own. He understands that cigars are cultural and they're important here in the United States.
Yeah, I think another important thing to add to that is that this is, like you said, a negotiation tactic. Traditionally, what we've seen are tariffs that are designed to be a constant level, designed to level a playing field by providing an added cost to imports that are coming into the country, and that's designed to sort of stay in place for a period of time. Here we're seeing tariffs that are being leveraged as a negotiation tool. One of the good things about that is that as those negotiations progress, we can see reductions in tariffs, we can see potential for exemptions, we can see potentials for different nuances being applied for free trade zones and things like that. But the downside is that it requires a constant level of vigilance and constant communication with the administration. We understand the goals that they're trying to achieve, and we're constantly talking with them about how we fit into that overall puzzle and where we can demonstrate that the industry that we're talking about is not an industry that's taking away jobs from Americans, but providing job opportunities, an industry that cannot be fully replicated in the United States. So we're not talking about the opportunity to onshore manufacturing or take the limited manufacturing that's happening in domestically and move it offshore.
And I agree with what they've said. And post-election, this is something that our organizations, in DC have been talking about since the week of the election in November. There's definitely a role for us to play. But a lot of what we expect to see, the 90-day pause on the increased tariffs, runs through July. And there are a lot of conversations being had on a country-by-country basis with folks within the administration. And we're fortunate between congressional leadership, folks like Secretary Rubio, who was a great champion for the industry, and really understand what our industry adds to the administration's priorities. They're talking about border security and economies overseas, small business success across the country, and so we our industry across the board does hit a lot of those administration priorities. The place where we see the individual countries that are going to lead those negotiations. You've seen, and there are more country representatives coming to Washington, every week, having those conversations. And we, as an industry, have a role to play in complementing those efforts. And as each of our priority, or the countries where we have significant industry presence, if they're making progress with the administration, there's a role to play for us and other significant industries to try to help those conversations forward. But they're not conversations that we're going to start as an industry. And we've seen, particularly with this administration, that trying to do things that aren't helpful can really hurt you more than they can help. So we are daily, looking for those opportunities to be helpful and return the certainty that the industry needs to keep investing in the future.
And I think Dennis is spot on. We're trying to communicate what is going on in real time. The tariffs of 2 weeks ago are not the tariffs of today. So obviously there are changes with that. Right now you have the baseline 10% across the board. The big three countries that we're most concerned on are Honduras, the Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua. In the past few days, you had an 18% tariff on Nicaragua reduced to 10%. So that was, on the fly. I was doing a segment for one of the cigar media outlets, and in between that, the rates change. So we're going to report to you on real time. We're going to express our viewpoints on things. We're looking at exemptions, as Patrick noted. Some of those exemptions are, I said this in my opening speech, the U.S. is the largest retail market for premium cigars. We domestically cannot produce the product here in the United States to meet those levels. Much, it's a specific agricultural product that has to be produced in those certain areas in those countries. So, we are advocating with that message. We're also looking at some of the exemptions. There was information that was released by Customs and Border Protection, who's enforcing the tariffs and the tax collection, or the collection side and import side, that 20% of value of American-made products, there might be some deductions for that. So we're exploring a lot of different avenues. A lot of behind-the-scenes conversations are occurring. As Dennis noted and Patrick noted, it can't be front forward. But I want to ask another question. I think it was good that Rob, you brought this up. China. I know that for a lot of the industry here, we have great accessories, humidors, some packaging produced in China at 125% tariff. That could be a little bit of a concern. What are the thoughts and timetable of things? I know we've been hearing 3 to 6 months to see how these tariffs work out. What would you say to the folks in the industry that may have packaging or distribution with China?
No, that's a great question. When it comes to China, we have to realize that China's retaliatory tariffs are not going to go away simply because other countries are coming to the table to negotiate with President Trump. President Xi is going to dig his heels in just as aggressively as President Trump does. And you're right, these 10% tariffs, we've been told to buckle up for about 3 to 6 months. And they being the administration, anticipate a lot of those either being reduced or potentially even disappearing in that 3 to 6 month window. I think personally, we're going to start seeing the negotiation with China happen after that 6 month window. But the administration has proven, and they've already shown in the last 4 or 5 days, that they're willing to put exemptions in place for certain types of products, goods, technologies coming in from China. Think iPhones, think Apple technology. And we as an industry are already exploring what can we go to the administration with. For example, some of these high-tech humidors that have chips and computers and Wi-Fi technology built into them, and say, can these be considered part of that exemption? At the end of the day, our job is not simply to advocate for the stick, it's to advocate for the industry as a whole. And that also means that our retailers that specialize in the accessory market as well. Is it going to be a little bit more concerning for them in a 6 to 8 month window than it is for a traditional manufacturer? Absolutely. But I think that we could all agree here that we are not in pull the emergency handbrake situation right now. We do need to sort of let this play out. And as an industry, we have to acknowledge that we have to stand in support of our home nation's policies looking forward, while making sure we're advocating for our members as well. And that's why we can't aggressively go out, to Dennis's point, and start suggesting changes, because the last thing that we want to do is put that target on the back of our industry.
And I think in the audience, a lot of people were relieved and excited with the court victory, and not having the user fees. Dennis, I want to ask you this question: what would you say to folks? User fees are gone, but now they have a tariff. It was kind of like one after the next, win and then feeling a little bit of pain. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's always challenges and opportunities that we face, and I think our advocacy operations are built to address those. Through laying the groundwork for what became the MATA decision. That started years ago on Capitol Hill. With the tax situation, every Congress people are introducing new legislation trying to, they call it equalize taxes, which really is, doubling, tripling, quadrupling what our customers are having to pay. And so, it's something that, in building the operations that all the organizations have in Washington, and we're up on Capitol Hill and within the White House and agencies every day, trying to have those conversations and gather that intelligence and make our arguments about why doing negative things on the industry would put a lot of people out of business, and having to pay the number of SKUs that walking around the booths that the manufacturers have, and walking into a store humidor and seeing all the different products. If you have to pay user fees on all of those, that is a huge hit to a small industry. And fortunately, we've been able to hold them at bay. And I think the current administration is probably unlikely to bring that back. But as we've seen with the change elections of the last decade, the pendulum swings, and I think we are uniquely positioned with bipartisan support on Capitol Hill, and a lot of relationships the industry's built over the years, that no matter who's in control, we have avenues to get our message out and be effective for our constituencies.
So I think that's a good segue into a tax question, but I want to be very transparent with the tariff situation. Our industry, and I think all three trade associations, are doing very targeted outreach, making sure that the administration understands the impact on small businesses as well as the cigar producing countries. But it is a world economy that's feeling these tariffs. So I think we would be remiss to not point out the reality that there are much bigger industries, there are all sectors of the economy that are doing the same thing. So it's not as simple as some of our other legislative efforts where we can go and ask for an exemption for premium cigars. When you have pharmaceuticals, you have cars, you have much larger industries, it is very challenging for us. But on the tax front, as Dennis started to talk about, and I'm going to ask Patrick Anderson this question, we see these reoccurring tobacco tax equity introduced each Congress. Right now, we feel pretty good about where the dynamics are in both the House and Senate, but that is an avenue where we need retailers, manufacturers, industry supporters to be involved with our associations. So can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. It's the last election was frankly good for the industry in terms of stability in Congress. and stability on the federal tax issues. But it's not a time to slow down. When we see favorable opportunities on Capitol Hill, that's the time to ramp up our efforts, ramp up our lobbying, because what tends to happen in these periods where there is fewer, I guess, adversarial issues is that the members go around and they start recruiting. And they start recruiting supporters, they start gathering co-sponsors, so that the next time they come into a position of power, they can reintroduce the same legislation, and now they have momentum on day one. We've been very successful, I think, as three associations here in beating back this tobacco tax equity. It was at one point, looked like it had some momentum and was going to be a part of a major infrastructure package. The Build Back Better Act, if you guys remember that from a few years ago, we were able to get that stripped, and we've continued to kick that dead horse, and we'll continue to kick the dead horse so that it doesn't come back up again. But that's somewhere where you guys can also engage as business owners, writing to your congressman or picking up the phone and making a call to their congressional office, letting them know that that legislation unfairly targets you guys. It makes a mark. They keep track. I hear all the time, my congressman's not going to listen to me just because I write a letter. They keep track of those things, and they may not write your name down, but they have a tally in their office, and when these things pop back up, they ask their staff, are we getting phone calls about it? Are the businesses in my district writing in? So I would encourage all of you guys to do that, even in this year where you're not going to hear a lot about threats on the federal side regarding tax.
And I think, all three trade associations working together to fight taxation is very important. I think we're all proud of a record. The last 5 years, there's been no tax increases at the federal or the state level. I think that's something that we all take great pride in, and a lot of the gentlemen on the stage are responsible for that. But Rob, on the tax situation, do you see that changing at all at the state level? I know there's some concerns with certain states introducing legislation that would be very harmful.
It's definitely something that's concerning because, again, it comes to an advocacy standpoint. We are only a portion of your voice. When we see something like this pop up in the state, and I'm going to call Indiana out because we successfully killed a generational tobacco ban there. But it was because of how active the members in those states were in contacting their legislators and telling them that this is a no-go. It also means replicating the type of good companion organizations that we create at the legislative level. And I specifically want to commend all three of our organizations on how we deal with the Congressional Cigar Caucus. That is an extremely beneficial organization in helping have members of Congress carry our message for us across the hills of Congress. And they were represented here today by the co-chair of the Congressional Cigar Caucus, Troy Carter, that we're actually in his home district. He represents New Orleans, and he spent almost 3 hours on the show with us today. But it reflects back even further where Governor Landry spoke to us a few days ago, and when he was in Congress, he was a member of the Congressional Cigar Caucus. And so I know there's been conversations amongst our three organizations, can we replicate that at the state Senate and the state House level as well? And I think Ryan can talk a little bit about this, about how our Cigar Caucus is now bicameral in the U.S. and the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. We're very proud that this Congress we introduced Gary Peters from Michigan and Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama as the co-chairs for the Senate side of the Cigar Caucus. And that offers us an even stronger backstop because we don't have to control that much of the Senate to be able to kill bills as they come up. Just to piggyback off of what everybody else was sharing, with the tobacco tax equity provisions that have been reintroduced time and time again. Part of what killed that last year, or in last Congress, was the Dominican Republic came out and said that they would lose 50,000 jobs just in the first year And the Biden administration listened to that. And the members of Congress listened to that. And Trump understands that. President Trump understands that even with relatively low tariffs on Honduras and the Dominican Republic, these are going to have major employment issues come up in those countries, and that can certainly lead to immigration issues. And that being top of mind for the Trump administration, we expect some good conversations to come out of that.
I think it's important to note that immigration is going to be one of those arguments, as I referenced, that when we talk about the tariff situation, there's a destabilizing effect when you have the increase of tariffs on imports. So that's a good thing to mention. I want to turn to this side of the room on something that Rob mentioned, generational smoking bans or generational nicotine bans. I think aside from the tariff issue, even though that's very top of mind right now because it's in the mainstream news, generational nicotine bans, generational smoking bans, probably the biggest risk to all of your businesses out there for the next few years. Can you explain, Patrick and Dennis, what a generational smoking or nicotine ban is, where we've seen it, and how can we fight back on it?
Sure. So the generational smoking bans is a concept originated out of New Zealand, quickly took hold in a few other countries, quickly got noticed by the World Health Organization, and it's one of those ideas that is spreading very quickly. But essentially, instead of looking at what is the minimum age to purchase tobacco products, the generational ban sets a date at which those citizens will no longer ever be allowed to purchase a tobacco product. So, for example, we picked the random date, January 1st, 2020. Anybody born after that date, it'll be illegal for them to buy tobacco. If they show up to a store to purchase a cigar or pipe tobacco, they'll be carded not to see how old they are, but to see when their birth date was, to see if they're even allowed to purchase tobacco. As you can imagine, this creates a lot of problems. It creates two classes of citizens. I think that's a terrible precedent for this country to start doing, because as you can imagine, we start with tobacco, what comes next? But it also leads to, not just our industry's problem, but where does this issue actually end? Unfortunately, we've seen this pop up at the local level in a few states, and we've also seen it now popping up at the state level. And it's an issue that sounds so out of scope for what Americans think is reasonable. The feedback we get very frequently is, oh yeah, I saw that, but that'll never happen. That's crazy. But it is happening. It's been going on for several years, and every year it shows up. Every year it gets a little bit stronger. And it's something that we need to be prepared as an industry to push back hard on.
And I think one of the good things that working together, our associations have been able to do is tell the story of who our consumers are. Our consumers are not smoking cigars on the loading dock in the pouring rain because they're hooked on the product. The average smoker, one and a half a month. A lot of people smoke more. We love those who come in and buy more. But they are a celebratory product. They're an enjoyment product. They're not something that kids are walking into cigar shops. And so really being able to tell that story that while we fundamentally disagree with the premise entirely, the Federal Tobacco Control Act prohibits banning of products. So Massachusetts says, okay, we're not going to ban it, but we're just not going to let you buy it unless you're 107 years old. That's not going to work. So being able to lay the groundwork for if there does come a time that these things do get even more traction, being ready with the data, with the arguments, with the relationships in the legislatures, and the grassroots advocates like you guys and your customers to be able to push back and say, if they are going to do something like that, that we, as the unique industry that we are and the consumer base that we have, should not be subjected to that. But certainly something that we can't let our guard down on. And we are, while we're fighting the daily battles that are raging in front of us each day now, are exceptionally mindful of the future and coordinating how to keep the future looking bright as well.
So I know there's a couple legislative packages that are being put together in Congress. As small business owners, as manufacturers, it's not all doom and gloom, it's not all bad. Can you all talk a little bit, whoever wants to take this one, talk a little bit about some of the positive things if some of the bills roll through Congress and we're able to get some small business deductions or benefits through?
Well, one thing that the Trump administration's made very clear is they want to see the further growth and strength of the small business community in this country. They understand that that's where the true American dream starts. And so, we've heard a lot of talk about one big beautiful bill, right? That's been covered in the news since December. But what a lot of people aren't realizing that's included in those big beautiful bills are provisions to help your small businesses thrive in a more competitive market space. But it also empowers the manufacturers that are here, right, to increase their investment in our industry as well as industries like ours across the country. And so, I think Dennis was absolutely right. While we do spend a lot of time focusing on how can we protect your interests today, right? What can we do in the immediate? A lot of the conversations that we have, especially with members of Congress who we consider allies, are those conversations about 5, 10, 15 years from now. What can we be doing? What can we be drafting? How far out can we look so that the industry as a whole does not have to be sitting on bated breath 12 months at a time? And ultimately, I think that we're going to see a lot more of and excuse me, I'm going to steal Ronald Reagan's words here, a lot more of a trickle-down approach to this in the state legislatures. And I think that's where Ryan and especially Patrick can really chime in on that.
I think you nailed it. So I'm not gonna pontificate and keep everybody longer than they need to, Rob.
And I want to ask one final question before we conclude. I know we have a tight program. These gentlemen will be sticking around. I know many of you may have specific questions. We'll be around throughout the show after this to answer them. But we do have another part of the program right after this. My final question, on the news, we saw a lot about HHS, FDA. We have a new HHS secretary, we have a new FDA commissioner. What do we expect there? We've also seen in the news a lot of people getting fired, rehired. Dennis, Patrick, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So we have a new HHS secretary, a very health conscious HHS secretary. But some of the things, sometimes we get a little too focused on questions like, does such and such a politician enjoy cigars? Does such and such a politician enjoy a drink on occasion? And I think in this particular case, we need to be asking a deeper question, which is, what is it that Secretary Kennedy actually cares about reforming in government? And it's not tobacco policy that he's focused on. It's issues about transparency, and that's transparency, corporate transparency, also government transparency. And in a lot of ways, that dialogue plays into our favor because we've struggled for a long time getting the Food and Drug Administration to acknowledge their own research and the federal studies that CDC is putting on, that NIH is putting together. And that's a message that we are now able to go to the Department of Health and Human Services and actually have people who are interested in hearing that case and seeing what they can do about it. We saw a lot about the firings that have happened. They happened right after the new FDA administrator was confirmed. However, it was not because he fired them. Those were directives that came straight from the White House as part of the whole government efficiency, remodeling, restructuring, and refocusing. So, that can kind of cut two ways, right? On the plus side, it'll probably slow down the pace of regulatory development. Pace of regulatory development. On the downside, for companies that are looking at PMTA processes and things like that, it can slow that stuff down as well. And we as sort of the government affairs folks are taking a longer view of this. We think that there's going to be a lot of rehiring over the next 2 years as this administration figures out, okay, we've stripped them down to bare bones. What are the parts that aren't functioning properly? Where do we need to see these agencies staff up and right size the staffing for the mission that they have ahead?
Yeah, and one of the things that we're really focused on from a government efficiency side is, over the last several years, our industry, our three organizations have spent a tremendous amount of time and resource fighting the misguided deeming rule in order to have it thrown out. What a lot of people don't understand is the government spent a lot of money trying to defend that same misguided rule, and so we're looking to work with our allies to quantify that and prevent that from happening in the future. Looking to improve data. Patrick mentioned, CDC, they do a youth risk behavior survey, and all they ask is, have you had one puff of a cigar in the last 30 days? And that's what our adversaries in the tobacco control space say, well, 16% of kids smoke cigars. Oh my gosh, you've got to go after them. And really, working with folks like Secretary Kennedy, and we'll have a new head of the Center for Tobacco Products over the next few months. But it's really fortunate that we're outside of the PMTA process now, because the products that they are taking applications from, they have years of backlogs, and at the rate they're going, they won't get through the applications they have until sometime next century. And so, we are looking at ways that both they can hopefully improve the efficiency, but that we can leverage the inefficiency that has historically been the case to say they can't even handle what they are supposed to. Don't throw us in there too. That's going to be even greater. So we have a lot of great allies, and a lot of work ahead of us. But it's a good landscape for us to be working in, and all three organizations working together for all of the industry's interests. Is a great thing.
So one final comment on FDA, because I don't want anybody to leave here thinking that everything is really going great in that direction. We do actually have some rulemaking issues that are ongoing at FDA. One of them is a low nicotine rule, and this is an effort by the agency to restrict the amount of nicotine in any tobacco product. And that is very problematic for products that contain large amounts of tobacco proportionally, such as cigars. And essentially, the rule as it's originally been proposed, there is no product that can meet the standard. It would require everyone to shift to genetically modified tobacco products, which, as we know, this is a craft. Right? This is not mass production. This is a craft. This is going to require reformulation across the board. It's a rule that doesn't make sense, and that's something that we are continuing to fight with FDA about throughout this comment period, and hopefully we'll have good news to report in the months to come.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for giving us a government affairs snapshot. As I mentioned, a lot of us will be around to answer specific questions and go from there. But I think this is a perfect opening to talk about an organization that has been partnered with a lot of our associations, has built a lot of goodwill on Capitol Hill for the premium cigar industry at large. And I want to turn it over to Storm Bowen of Cigars for Warriors so that they can present some of their awards. Cigars for Warriors was with our teams up on Capitol Hill just a couple weeks ago, and they were out talking about veterans benefits and the story of the impact on mental health that Cigars had. Very impactful session. So Storm, we're going to clear set and go right into the awards. Thank you.
Great panel.